On page 8 of the Player's Handbook, there is a section about the 3 pillars of adventure: combat, role-playing, and exploration. Adventurers can try to do anything their players can imagine, but it can be helpful to talk about their activities in 3 broad categories: exploration, social interaction, and combat. Exploration includes both the adventurer's movement through the world and their interaction with objects and situations that require their attention. Exploration is the give and take of the player describing what they want their characters to do, and the dungeon master telling the players what happens as a result. On a large scale, this might involve the characters spending a day crossing a rolling plain, or an hour making their way through caverns underground. On the smallest scale, it could mean one character pulling a lever in a dungeon room to see what happens. Social interaction features the characters talking to someone, or something else. It might mean demanding that a captured scout reveals the secret entrance to the goblin lair, getting information from a rescued prisoner, pleading for mercy from an orc chieftain, or persuading a talkative magic mirror to show a distant location to the adventurers. The rules in Part 2, especially Chapters 7 and 8, support exploration and social interaction, as do many class features and personality traits in Part 1. Combat, the focus of Chapter 9, involves characters and other creatures swinging weapons, casting spells, and maneuvering for position, and so on, all in an effort to defeat their opponents, whether that means killing every enemy, taking captives, or forcing a rout. Combat is the most structured element of a D&D session, with creatures taking turns to make sure that everyone gets a chance to act. Even in the context of a pitched battle, there's still plenty of opportunity for adventurers to attempt wacky stunts like surfing down a flight of stairs on a shield, to examine the environment, maybe by pulling a mysterious lever, and to interact with other creatures, including allies, enemies, and neutral parties. Yeah, obviously D&D has very robust rules for combat. And while role-playing is often seen as the system that doesn't have rules but kind of needs them, and that's kind of true because resolving everything with one persuasion check is like the default solution, but that doesn't really work, it's not very satisfying. It's also kind of unfair to players who are not very charismatic in real life to ask them to make these dramatic persuasion pitches in real life and then use that to affect the role, so there has to be a middle ground, and there are ways to do it, and we'll do a video about that in the future. But I've also seen a lot of discussion over the exploration pillar, because while there absolutely are rules for travel and exploration, including survival checks, overland travel mechanics, and hex crawls, that's not how a lot of people play the game. But then I watched Sly Flourish's video about the 3 pillars, and he said something that blew my mind. He reframed exploration as discovery, and suddenly I understood the potential of that 3rd pillar. Now, I should say that for the majority of this video, I'm going to refer to exploration not as pulling levers, but as literally travel and exploration. First, I do want to acknowledge that exploration, in the typical sense, can be a very powerful element in the game. But just like how so many role-playing scenes are just broken down to make a persuasion check, one roll, and then we move on, I've seen or heard a lot of stories where basically the same thing happens in exploration scenes with a survival roll. But discovery, that's totally different. If I sneak into the Lord's study and start rooting around through his personal belongings looking for evidence of corruption, I don't really know anybody who would describe that as exploration. I mean, I guess I'm exploring his fireplace for the remnants of burnt documents. But discovery does lend itself to that sort of activity really easily. This doesn't even change the behavior in any meaningful way, just our approach to it. Because it can be really hard to make sure that there are exploration scenes in your games, especially if you're running, say, an urban campaign, or if your party has already explored most of the territory. Right now, my Curse of Strahd party has been to basically every location on the map of Barovia, with the exception of like 2 places. And they're definitely going to at least one of those locations the next time we play. The possibilities for them to explore the space are rapidly dwindling. And do I feel like my game is missing anything? No. They've basically been everywhere, and that's fine. They're feeling more comfortable in the campaign world because they've established their place in it. That's often what happens when your characters level up. There are fewer corners of the world for them to explore. Looking at the 2 completed Critical Role campaigns, we can literally see how power creep makes it possible for players to get to destinations without doing any of the exploration or travel in between. For more than half of the streamed Vox Machina campaign, the players have access to the Tree Stride spell. They're able to enter any tree in the world and come out any other tree as long as they are familiar with it. For at least a year of games, they could cast Plane Shift and go to different dimensions pretty easily. And while there are always still obstacles blocking their way to certain goals, this does feel like the natural evolution of most D&D campaigns. eventually, exploration is not such a big deal. The same thing basically happened in Campaign 2. They had a wizard friend they could call upon to help teleport them to other parts of the world, just transporting them halfway across the continent whenever they needed. And near the end of the campaign, they had sequences where they would go from one teleportation circle to another, jumping from major city to major city to major city in moments. Sure, there are still dungeons, but the wilderness itself doesn't really seem like there's much left to explore. Except, first of all, that's not quite true. Dungeons do count. In the final arc of Campaign 1, they jumped across the plains hither and yon, but the last few episodes were still about them journeying through a dungeon trying to reach a villain. There is still plenty of exploration in those episodes. The entire final arc of Campaign 2 is about the party exploring the wilderness and trying to go to many different dungeons, and there are a ton of basically the equivalent of survival roles as they just have to make their way through this bleak landscape. This is actually where Matt seems to have landed on an exploration system that he really enjoys, and I think is really cool, and I kind of want to find a way to adapt it to my own games. It's awesome. So exploration can still play a role in your game at higher levels. But what about an adventure that has nothing to do with a dungeon? Now, obviously this advice about the 3 pillars of D&D is not a hard and fast rule. We can do anything we want in our games. But the 3 pillars exist to help us craft interesting, compelling sessions. For example, a dungeon crawl adventure is assumed to be very heavy on combat and exploration. But you can, and probably should, still have some NPCs or factions in your game. That way the role-playing pillar is still present. It might not be as prominent as it would be in other adventures, but that's alright. It should still be present to help break up the flow of your game, and offer a more varied experience that appeals to different interests and skill sets in your players. But I've been in the same situation, but with exploration. How do you add exploration scenes when you're running an adventure like Helm's Deep from Lord of the Rings? We've got role-playing, sure, there are loads of NPCs. We've got combat, absolutely, that's the main gimmick. But what about exploration? Is there just no exploration in those sessions? The exploration pillar is meant to reward those who want to seek out information. But if we swap that word out with discovery, we can see how it can still play a role in a combat-centric adventure set in a static location that your players know really well. And the scenes where your players take the time to assess the enemy's numbers and tactics, that's discovery. Looking for a weak point in their defenses? That's also discovery. Trying to figure out what the bad guy's secret weapon is? Definitely discovery. This seems like a bad example because they did fail, but honestly, Legolas just rolled crap damage against the orc. But you know what? Finding out that your keep actually has a severe weak point that's only exploitable if the bad guys happen to have discovered gunpowder, which apparently they have, that's a hell of a discovery. Now, if you're looking for a way to improve the experience of discovery at your tables, one thing that helps is making your information easier to access and keep track of. And that brings us to today's sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is an online resource that you can use to create articles and timelines, upload and nest maps, and even play the game through the website. You can make articles for anything in your game, so you can add as much detail as you want without worrying about burning through notebooks. And as someone who has spent a lot of time putting D&D stuff into notebooks, only to then have to bring them to each session and root through them to try to find the stuff you're looking for, yeah, World Anvil is a much better solution. And it makes it easier to share content with your players, because you can invite them to join your page and give them access to information. Which, again, is much easier than trying to fit all of your lore onto an index card and handing them a hastily written note in the middle of a session. You could sign up for World Anvil for free, or you can use the code SUPERGEEK to save 40% off of any annual subscription. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Thank you for watching. This was a shorter video than some of my more recent ones, but this is something that really helped me rethink how I approach some major aspects of my D&D games. So I wanted to share this insight with you. I hope it is helpful. If you want to support the channel, there are 4 ways you can do that. You can subscribe and ring the bell, and you'll get notified about videos the moment they come out. You can support me on Patreon. Any dollar amount really helps this channel. You can join my Discord and be a part of a community of really cool people talking about real cool stuff, and you could be one of those real cool people, because you already are. You just gotta make it official by joining the Discord. Or you could join my newsletter for occasional updates about what I've got going on. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, play fair and have fun.